Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Daniel Pinault. I'm a longtime Access/Office Apps MVP. 2010 now, I think, was my first award. Today I'm going to do something, well, you see a few people ask about it here and there, and it's, I guess, tending towards what we see sometimes in web applications on websites. And it's how can we count the number of characters used in a control versus the allowed number of characters, right? So you can give an idea to the user as to how much room they have left to write whatever it is they're writing. So this is just a nifty feature that you can add to some of your databases to give users a visual cue. So I'm going to break this guy down, as you're going to see here. I have three versions of the, well, it's not the same code, but to achieve the same effect. So we're going to go from simple to the most advanced. And they each have their pros and cons, and it depends somewhat on your ability as a developer, but also what you're trying to achieve here. You know, it's not always worth your time to go super complicated if you're just doing a quick one-off. But in other cases, if you want to implement this easily in a variety of forms, then maybe going with the most advanced version is the simplest at the end of the day for implementing. So the choice will be yours. I will present the three versions and you pick and choose what suits your needs. So the most basic, and let's just look at it in function and then we'll see how I did it. Would be this basic version. And actually, I guess before we even dive into the form, let's briefly look at the table. Now, this is just a generated table from Microsoft parts. So I didn't even create this. Don't blast me for the way it's designed. But if you look at, let's say here, the short text, that's what I went after. So short text data types. If you look down here at the field size, so the number of characters we're allowing, so we've got 50 for first name, 50 for last name, the title allows 100, and email address we're allowing 255. So as you can see, we've got different field size for different fields, and you're going to see this in operation as we move forward. So now that we understand the basic design of the fields, now let's look at the actual implementation. So if I open up this guy here and we look, you'll see I've implemented it only on the first name in the basic version. And if you come here and you start typing, you'll see the counter changes. So I'm up to 8 characters used out of the allowable 50. Now we're down to 7. Down to 3 have been used. How exactly am I doing this? Well, if we open this guy up in design view, and since this is all being done through code, we select the control we're interested in, so first name, and you'll see I have an onChange event. You'll also notice here I have a label placed below the control of interest that I named label character counter, okay? So if we go and look at the code behind the actual control for first name, you'll see here that I'm coming and changing the caption of that label, which makes sense because that's where I'm displaying the character count. And I'm simply reading off the number of characters currently in that control against a hard-coded value, which we checked in the table. I know that that field only allows 50 characters. So every time a change is made in that field, it's just recalculating how many characters are currently used, and it just updates that caption over and over. You'll also notice I did the exact same thing when the form is loaded or when the user navigates to a different record. So we're using the form current to also perform an update. So if the user does change records, right now I'm only using 3, but if we switch, we need to update that now it's only 2. So we use the form current event to do the exact same thing. It's the same code, but we're using the form current event to trigger and recalculate and change the caption depending on what record we're on. And then we use the controls onChange event to capture any changes that are made while the user is actively in that record. So as you can see here, everything is hard coded. This 50, you have to hard code. This is the basic version. It's the most fundamental, but it means that everything is hard coded. So now if you go and change your table design and you say, well, we're not going to allow 50 anymore, we're only allowing 20. Well, then you've got to know, I've got to go change now my VBA code. So it works. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but it is somewhat dependent on you to remember when you make design changes should that occur. You'll also see that this is a very basic implementation. When you look at the advanced, you'll see I threw in some new bells and whistles. You know, you can do that in the basic as well, but I'm just showing you. This is the most fundamental one line of code. Well, two, because we're using two events, but you're able to implement this very easily. Now, if we want to move things on along a little bit here, let's look at another version. So I called this my advanced version. And if we come here, as you can see, now when I click on it, it appears only then. When we click elsewhere, there's nothing. And we click here, oh, it shows up. You'll also notice, it may be hard to see on the screen, but there's color here. It's green currently. If we keep writing, it goes to a yellowy orange, and you keep writing, it switches to a red. So as you can see, it moves along with me, and it's still the on change. It's working. So we get progression as the person's making changes live, and it just automatically updates. How am I doing this? How does it differ from the basic? Well, we come in here, and you'll see I don't have a label below each box. I didn't want to get into that. It just becomes complicated to have to do and give names. So what I did is I have a single label, and you can position it wherever you like. It doesn't make a difference. And it's just gonna, when you select a control, move to that control. So that's the beauty. We only have one label to deal with. And it's named the exact same thing. Character counters, just like the previous one. And all we're doing is we're moving it down and updating it based on wherever the selection currently is. So let's take a look. How am I doing that? Well, each one of these has 3 events being used. We're using the change, the got focus, and the lost focus. Now, why now have we gone from 1 event to 3? Well, I'm using the got focus when you click in it to move the label to where it needs to be. And when you exit it, I'm also using it to make it go away. So the got focus and lost focus is just to position that label box here to the, this guy here, to the appropriate control wherever you've clicked. That way we only need the 1. So that's why we need now an extra 2 events. They're very simple, but we need them to position that. The on change is doing the exact same thing as before. It's updating the caption of that label. So let's look at the code. Let's start off with the got focus and lost focus. The got focus, you'll see here, I'm calling a function. Character counter position. Then in the first name, the lost focus, then I use character counter hide because we've exited, we no longer need it. So let's look at each one of these. So I created general functions. Instead of having to put the code in each event over and over and over, it creates duplication. And then if you need to do updates, now you got to update multiple places. You create a usable function, subroutine, a procedure that you can just call over and over and over. And now we only have one place that needs to be updated if ever we want to change things. It makes it much cleaner code. And now because of this, we can use it in multiple forms. It just makes it reusable, makes a lot more sense. And what is it doing? Well, we're passing to it a form, and we're passing to it a control. So the form is the active form that you're in. This is why the beauty of this, you can implement this on multiple forms very easily. And the control is the control you're in, the one you just clicked on, you went into. And what we're telling it is, we're going and finding that label. So on the form that we're passing to you, go find me this control. And now we're telling it position the top to where it needs to be and position the left where it needs to be. So it's going to align it wherever it needs, regardless of where you've placed that label initially. Then we're going to make it visible. So we've clicked on something, we want to position it and now make it visible to the user. The second part of it then is going to be, okay, we're making it visible. We want to update the caption. So that's a third routine. The third routine, update the caption. Once again, the form, the control, And do we want to apply coloring, the green, orange, red, or not? It's an option. By default, it's optional, but we've set it to true. So yes, color it. So we come in here, we check, is the control that we've clicked in bound to a field or is it an expression? And we have a function up here for that. And all we're doing is we're checking, does the left part of the control source have an equal? If it is, then it's an expression. We're not going to mess with that. But if it's bound to a field, then I can come here and I can go find the current length of what's in that control. And we can go and get, what is this? A value of a temp var. Okay, now we're muddying the waters. Where does this come from? Well, for that, we need to go back to the form itself. So sorry, we're going to bounce back to our form. And you're going to notice here, I have an extra little thing going on when the form initially opens. We're going to do this once because the design of the fields won't change. So we only need to do this initially. And what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the record set clone and I'm going to loop through the fields one by one by one. And I'm going to only look at the text fields. And then for each text field that I have, I'm going to create a temp var with the form name and the field name, just making a unique name. That's all it is. It doesn't really have to be this. It just needs to be something unique that I can retrieve at a later date. And I'm grabbing the size of the field. You remember here in the basic, this 50? Well, that's what this is doing. It's going and getting for each one of those fields and grabbing the field size from the design of that field, that table. That way we don't have to hard code that 50 anymore. If we change the table, this code will automatically update in consequence. So what we're doing is we're creating, let's go back to our form for 2 seconds. It's at the load going and reading. Okay, the first name, what's the size? It's 50. Okay. This guy, last name, 50. Okay. The title, it's 100. Okay. And the email address, no, it's 255. And it's storing this in temp vars. That way, when we come back to our code and we come back to our function, it's able to retrieve the value of the field size. So that 50, 100, 255. That's all it is. I know it's a little convoluted, but at the opening of the form, it goes and checks what's the current field size for each of our fields, and then we're able to use it here to update the caption in consequence. But we don't have to hard code any of it. It's all done dynamically. So we've updated the caption. That's glorious. We now know how many characters out of how many characters have been used. And then if we've chosen to apply the color, then it's just doing this random evaluation. So it's doing a division, the number of characters used versus the number of characters expected in that field as a maximum. So it makes a decimal, right? It's going to create a percentage. And then I set it that 0 to 60% is green, 60 to 90% is orange, and above 90 is red. This was completely arbitrary. You can change this to whatever you'd like. And like I said, when you call it, if you set this argument as false, it wouldn't even do the coloring. So I just put it there, jazz things up a little bit. It really brings it closer to what you see in web applications. Okay, so let's just recap very quickly. When we select the character counter position, it's going to position it top and left, and it's going to update the value that's displayed to the user. The other thing we had discussed, okay, so we got the got focus, was the lost focus. And here again, character counter hide. What is it? You'll see it's the simplest thing in the world. We're telling on that form, find my label, the caption label that for the character counter, and set the visibility to false, so hide it. So we're exiting the control. We don't need to see it anymore. So we're just hiding it. That's all it is. And we're using a reusable function sub here that we can just call over and over rather than hard coding it in each event, just to make coding simpler and updating code much simpler. It's easier to read in the long run. So we've got the got focus. The got focus positions it and displays it initially. The lost focus hides it. Well, what about the change? Well, the change is very similar to what we had seen, but you're going to see if we go and look at it, what is it? It's the exact same function that we initially called when we position the label. So it's going to just simply, somebody changed a character in that control, we need to recalculate how many characters have been used versus how many are a maximum value, and recolor code accordingly to whatever the change was made. So that's why we're able to reuse this same function sub over and over and over. We're using it here, but we're using it here also for every time there's a character change. And if you come and look at other controls, it's the same thing. We keep doing the same thing over and over. So this was for the first name. For the email change, it's the same function. We're just calling, but now the me, which is the form, active control. The active control now is email address versus active control here was first name. So by making these super flexible procedures, we're able to use single line calls in any control we want. And that's the beauty of having done this, making reusable procedures that we're able to reuse email address, first name, last name, title. So you get to see how simple this implementation becomes. Very quickly, we're able to just call over and over the exact same thing. And we don't even have to put the name of the control because we're using active control. So it's completely transparent. It's the easiest thing now. You add another control to a text field, you just basically call these functions over again for that, and you're done. So once the initial setup is done, you're good as gold. It's as easy as can be to implement. And as you saw, we haven't changed anything, we won't save it. But as you see, you just start typing and it updates live in front of you, and it goes to orange and it goes to red. So super easy. So how can we improve upon this even further? Well, if we look at this, I was looking at this, I'm like, oof, it's not that it's complicated, but that's a lot of code. And if I want to implement this in a lot of existing forms, I don't want to have to go through this, control by control by control, and it just can become tedious. If it's a one-off, once again, this works really, really well, but it's not necessarily ideal. We can improve upon this. How can we improve upon this? Well, we can use something called WithEvents, and we can build all of this dynamically, so we don't have to do all of this. And we can make it send it automatically does it for every single text data type. So let's take a look. Let's start off by looking at the form, and you'll see it operates exactly the same as the advanced. So right now you're thinking, oh, it's the exact same code, and yet it isn't. Let's take a look at what's behind this guy. If we come and take a look at the design view, you'll see there are no events. So how is it working? That's the beauty of WithEvents. So if we come here and we look, all we have to implement character counters on this form is we have two functions being used. We have the load and we have the close. So load is doing everything, and the close is just a cleanup. So let's go and take a look. Whoa, look at that. All those controls were working fine, and yet I only have, 6-7 lines of code in total. So the load just simply does an initial setup of the form, and the close does a cleanup, just sets a variable back to nothing, which is the character count variable up here. If you're paying attention to the prefix here, CLS, it should give you an indication that we're using classes. We are using the WithEvent classes. Now this can be coded different ways. I'm showing you my way. Different people do different things. But the way I've gone about it is I have two classes. I have an initial class, and then I have a specific for text boxes. So what I've done is I have the initial guy here where we're defining the form, but all of the real work happens here in the class init. So when we're here and we're initializing this guy, this is what's getting run. And it's doing two things. It's initially coming here and doing what we had seen previously in the advanced open. okay, with the temp vars. So it's initially going to go through the record set clones, exact same thing, looking for text data types and setting the temp vars. But it's all done behind the scenes through this class, so we don't have to hard code it in the form anymore. And then it's going to hide the character counter initially. The second part of it, and this is the beauty of WithEvents, is now we're going to go through control by control when it's a text box. And we're going to check if it's bound. If it is bound and we have a temp var with a value, so it has a size, so it's a text data type, then it's going to come in for that text box that we've now identified conforms to the rules that we want. It's going to create an event procedure for the on-got focus. It's going to create an event procedure on loss focus and another one for the on-change event, okay? What are these events? Well, that's where the second class comes in. So if we come and look at the second class, you'll see here that we go through, we're defining our text box so we can work with it. But here we've defined the got focus, the loss focus, and the change events. And for each one of them, we're doing the exact same thing as always. We're calling our reusable functions, the same ones. We haven't changed a thing. But it's all done dynamically through code, so we don't have to do it. And it's setting the form and the text box of interest. The form, and the text box of interest. So our input arguments for us. And that's it. So this class initialization does all the work that previously we were doing here manually ourselves by having to create each one of these events. Well, that is done automatically when the class is initialized. So they're not there when we're looking at it in design view. Nothing's here. But when the form opens and is loaded, then it gets initialized. Then they are created. So in fact, they do have event procedures, but they're created at runtime instead of being hard-coded. So if you need to make any changes, and I just had an example here, if you wanted to do color coding of, let's say, the border or things like that, you could equally do it right here in the class if you wanted. You could also, if you wanted to color the border, just since we're at that, I'm here coloring the text, you could easily come here and add changing the border, background color, whatever you'd like. But just to show the WithEvents, how it is simplified the coding of the form. Obviously, we have to have our classes. This has to be developed initially, a little bit more code initially up front, but now implementation takes 2 seconds. I can drop those 7 lines of code in any form in a second, and that form now for every text data type will now have a character counter in 2 seconds. So I copy 7 lines and my form now has character counters throughout. And that's it. That's what I was going to show you guys today. So you have very basic where you hard code things. You have more advanced where everything's contained within the form class itself. And then you've got an extremely versatile implementation, but you now have to bring class modules with it. So you pick and choose what makes you happy. I hope this has demonstrated something. I haven't really seen this implemented, certainly not with events in the past. And just a nifty little feature that you can use to up your form design a little bit and give a visual cue to your users so then they know when they're approaching the limits of what's allowable as an entry in their controls on their forms. Thank you for spending a couple minutes with me. As always, it is greatly appreciated. And if you don't mind, please like, share, subscribe, drop me a comment below, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.